So we completely forgot to mention when we recorded our intro that this is our 100th episode.
I mean, are we just not good at, like, congratulating ourselves? I mean, come on. This is a really major milestone.
It's a huge milestone, and all I can say is, well, we've both been sick, and, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
still a worldwide pandemic, and we're pretending it's not.
Yeah, exactly. It just crept up on us.
It totally did.
I feel like when we were at 90, I was like, oh my god, I can't wait. And then I just forgot. And here we are. But congratulations to us. And we're almost at 5 years, too. So, like, big year for us.
Yes. So we should do something special for the 5 year to actually make it something and not just forget like we kind of did with this.
Yeah. And we also reached over 500,000 downloads, too, recently.
That's true. So
thank you.
Thanks to all of you for listening.
Yeah.
And enjoy the episode.
Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Press Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen. And we're both sad sacks right now.
I know.
Yeah, so just over a week ago, I came down with COVID, probably for my second time, but this time at least I have, like, actual, evidence with my rapid test. And, yeah, you concuss yourself like a day later.
I did. And and we had to reschedule something with someone, and I felt like it was the saddest little email thread where you were like, can we reschedule? I have COVID. And I'm just like, oh, that works for me because I have a concussion.
Yeah. Doesn't rain but it pours.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay. We're here.
We're here, and now we're gonna switch topics to something possibly even more traumatic.
I know.
What the hell, LSA? You've done it again.
I know. And if you're just a new listener, the LSA is Linguistic Society of America, and it's one of the few, but the most probably populated membership of a linguistic society for linguists proper. I don't know.
Probably. I mean, there's a lot of linguists in the United States, and so I can't imagine that there's a bigger group in a different country. But then again, maybe like there's some other associations that have larger groups. I don't know. I can't think of any, though. You're probably right.
Yeah. And I say linguistics proper as like a kind of a subtweet. What is that when you say it out loud? It's not on Twitter. I don't know. But there is this very much this feeling of like gatekeeping within the community, and a lot of linguists are actually in other, like, have membership to other groups because they feel like their linguistics isn't appreciated within people who think of that there's a proper linguistics, or there's, a very narrowly defined linguistics.
Of course, you could always be members of multiple different societies and associations. So it's like, and many people are, right? The LSA is supposed to be an umbrella for every type of linguist.
Right.
And so the fact that there's some gatekeeping going on by syntacticians and semanticists in this resolution is, not great.
Yeah.
So the resolution... Therefore, be it resolved that Linguistic Society of America adopt the following version of the Chicago Principles on Freedom of Expression. And then they adapted them for the LSA. And so if you really want to know what the Chicago Principles of Freedom of Expression are, you can look them up, because it's long.
Yes.
So in a word, the LSA's fundamental commitment is to the principle that debate or deliberation may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even most members of the LSA community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or wrong-headed. It is for the individual members of the LSA community, not the LSA as an institution, to make those judgments for themselves and to act on those judgments not by seeking to suppress speech, but by openly and vigorously contesting the ideas that they oppose. Indeed, fostering the ability of members of the LSA community to engage in such debate and deliberation in an effective and responsible manner is an essential part of the LSA's educational mission. Sounds all nice, like, we're supposed to be able to, like, debate ideas and discuss them.
Right.
But...
which I think is on purpose, right? It's supposed to sound like common sense.
Let's never use common sense again. I fucking hate
That's right.
that term.
I know.
I always have.
Yeah.
I've hated it for like decades. It doesn't mean anything.
Well, it's ideological.
I mean, it's ideological. Yeah, each person has a different sense of what common sense is, right?
Exactly.
So, like, everybody has a different idea about what it is. And so, yeah, your ideology is placed onto that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, it's supposed to appeal to your sense of, like, I don't know, educational freedom, academic freedom. And in a vacuum, that might be all well and good. The problem is, why this now?
And why did we learn later that it happened to be introduced with 2 other requests?
Yes. So I actually think that that's the really important thing, is that they were put together. They were like suggested as a threesome.
As a shitty threesome. A shitty...
There are 3 confidential requests received from a group of members. It's hard to tell, but I assume the confidential requests all come from the same group of members.
Yeah.
And we don't know who these group of members are. There's signatories on the letter, but are those the same people who requested it? Unclear.
Right.
But anyway, the first thing is that the LSA endorsed the Chicago Principles on Academic Freedom. The second one was that the LSA ceased the voluntary collecting and reporting of demographic information as part of its individual member profiles and aggregated in its database. And 3, that the LSA ceased publication of perspective articles and any other opinion/commentary in language and or its other scholarly publications.
What the fuck?
Not collecting demographic information. Like, okay, why?
Yeah,
like, you just don't want anyone to know how white our field is?
That's
like,
my
that's
only
not
guess.
great.
My only guess that that's what it is, and I can't imagine how they would even lie about what the reasoning is for that.
Yeah, there's no reason not to collect that information. It's just like...
It's voluntary anyway.
It's voluntary.
It's just like...
Yeah, it's voluntary. It's just data. There's no way to, like, make that, like, spin it as, like, bad data. Like, no.
Right.
So, okay. Obviously in bad faith. And number 3,
yeah.
By the way, I have co-written a Perspectives article, but I bet our article is not one of the ones they were thinking of when they wrote this.
Right. And also, is that not literally undermining number 1?
Yes. It doesn't make any sense. Like, yeah, you just stop talking.
Yeah.
Let the adults speak.
I mean, I knew that this was in bad faith when I thought it was only just the resolution. But then someone found this, and I was like, oh, there's no arguing it's not now. Because not saying that there shouldn't be any perspective/opinion pieces in the journal is literally undermining this resolution. And so there has to be the bad, shitty ulterior motives that I thought.
Yeah, and I know some of these people. Not super well.
Yeah, you would, because it's your field. It's, you know, you're there at the Syntax Semantics Interface.
I was, yes. And,
yeah.
Like, I've met some of them, and they were very nice to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of me is like, okay, are they completely naive about what they're doing? And they've been, like, pulled in by people who I think are more nefarious actors? Or are they just as nefarious? I don't know. I really don't know.
Because some of these are people of color. Of the 10 signatories, a few of them are racialized individuals. So
I only know one of them who is racialized, but yeah.
Yeah, you gotta ask the question, is it naivete or is it John McWhorter shit?
I'm pretty sure in some cases it's McWhorter shit.
Yeah.
But I don't know those people. I just know their reputation.
Yeah. So I was talking to my partner about it, and I was like, I mean, this is just what it's gonna allow is, like, opening up things or an avenue for hate speech to be okay. And he's like, well, that's just bad behavior. That's not what's gonna happen. I was like, oh, no. We're in the field of language. So people there are a few linguists who like to say slurs out loud because it's a use first mention thing. Well, they'll say, oh, no, I'm not using it. I'm just mentioning the word. And they're not part of the group that the slur is directed at, and yet they still use it. No, this is definitely a direct avenue toward derogatory and hate speech being used willy-nilly.
And even if some of the letter writer or signatories wouldn't do that, which I'm pretty sure is the case in at least a couple of the cases that I know.
Right.
Like, I don't think that that's what they want.
No.
Some of them do, probably.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It opens the door for other people to do it.
Exactly.
Other linguists. So it doesn't even, in some ways, matter what the, like, impetus is. It's going to have that impact. And yeah, sure, it's bad behavior. But if we've said openly, well, we're not allowed to stop them, we can only, I guess, complain, maybe?
Right.
Although it's not really super clear what we're allowed to do. We're not allowed to stop it. So we can't kick people out of the LSA for using slurs.
Right.
We can't kick them out of the conference.
Right.
Or like a workshop or something. Like we just aren't allowed to do anything. Like that doesn't seem right.
No.
And it doesn't align, as some people have said, with like the principles of the LSA that have been passed previously. So it's a mess. It doesn't make any sense to do this. And like, why now? Like, what made them do this now?
Right.
And it seems like maybe it's the perspectives articles, particularly on race in linguistics.
Yep. Because those actually do mention the demographics, by the way, the collected information that they don't want collected anymore.
Right.
Which, and I've talked about in the past too, where it's like, it's minuscule, the amount of like Mexican Americans within the Linguistic Society of America. Like, it's not good. It's a poor reflection of who I would hope the society would want to be.
Yeah. And there's a good chance it won't pass, right?
Right.
Because a lot of people, like just numerically, there's a lot of people who are opposed to this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it doesn't pass. Then what? Well,
Right.
A lot of people are worried of what's going to happen in the media. Certainly, the right-wing people are going to take this and run and be like, oh, see, linguists are against academic freedom. There's nothing we can do to stop them from doing this. They're going to do it, no matter how nicely we word it. Which is, I don't know, it's a nightmare.
You know who might do this is linguist John McWhorter. He might be the one that is going to do, or even Steven Pinker, but more likely McWhorter. But it's not going to be good.
More likely with McWhorter, because I think Pinker wants to pretend that he's above this now. Like, he's not part of the linguistics. Like, oh, you don't want me? Okay, I'm not a linguist anymore.
Right.
I could be wrong. He might still do it.
Right.
But yeah, you're not the first person to say, I'm worried about McWhorter. Yeah, I think that McWhorter is probably going to say something.
In the New York Times. He has a newsletter in the New York Times.
It'll be in the New York Times. And that's the thing. Like, so I don't think we can do anything about the right-wing media.
Mm-hmm. They're
going to do what they're going to do. They outright lie about things. Like, they lie about people being doxxed when they're not actually doxxed. Like, they will just bald-faced lie.
Right.
But what's more worrying to me is the New York Times is going to take this and run with it, because they're like so like, they're free speech absolutists, or at least some of the people there are.
Yeah.
And like, I even talked to I can't remember his name now, the guy who did that Pinker article a couple of years ago about the Pinker letter. And when I had a conversation with him, I was like, wow, this guy's really biased. Like, he's very, very, very pro free speech no matter what.
Right.
And then he lied about not talking to anybody on the record, because I talked to him on the record.
Right, because you didn't say what he wanted you to say.
I guess I didn't put my foot in my mouth.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Right.
But
anyway,
so I don't know what to do about that. I mean, like, they're already have their minds set. Like, how do you convince them? We can't even convince, like, people that I consider to mostly be good faith linguists that this is wrong.
Right.
Some semanticists that I know, not super well, but well enough, I'm like, how are you not seeing what this is?
Why is this a problem at the syntax-semantic interface, do you think?
Well, I think it's a power thing. First of all, we're not really taught about power in language. Like, that's something we don't do. And like, there's no sociolinguists involved in this, as many people pointed out on various places. So sure, that's true. Yeah. But also, like, if you don't have an analysis of power, then you don't see the power that you have, I think.
Huh.
Or maybe you do. I don't know. Some of them, I think they really don't see what they're doing, though. Like, I know they're not as bad as some of the other people. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Who are definitely doing this in completely bad faith.
Yeah. Like, I know one is, for sure. And, oh, by the way, one of the signatories is Noam Chomsky, for all of the listeners out there.
Who's always been a free speech absolutist.
Right.
So it's completely unsurprising to me that he's on that list.
Mm-hmm.
But I am surprised by a couple of the others.
And of course, that makes it look more serious and more... I mean, people will see Noam Chomsky's name on the list and be like, okay. That might even be enough reason for it to be in the New York Times, you know?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a good chance it will, no matter what. I mean, if for some reason it passes and that this becomes like the LSA's statement, then it might not.
Yeah.
But a bunch of people are going to leave the LSA because that's just, it's not reflective of the, like, a large group of people who are part of the LSA.
Yep. Had to work pretty hard to be listened to in the first place for the things like the race statement and all these other things. And it feels like it's undermining all of that work. And yeah.
Well, yeah, it's exactly counter to that work.
Right.
Anyway, in this episode, we talk all about, like, different language varieties, learning or writing in English when it's not your first language, and it's a great volume. And you should.
I love talking to writers, poetic people that are just have oozing with talent.
Yes, they're really interesting people, and
I hope you enjoy.
So today we're very excited to have two of the editors of the new book, Tongues on Longing and Belonging Through Language. Euphemia Fantetti, who is a graduate of the Writers' Studio and holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph. Her short fiction collection, A Recipe for Disaster and Other Unlikely Tales of Love, was runner-up for the Danuta Gleed Literary Award and winner of the Bressani Prize. Ayelet Tavari is the author of The Art of Leaving, winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Memoir, and an Apple Books and Kirkus Review Best Book of 2019. She teaches creative writing at the University of King's College MFA and at the MFA in creative writing at the University of Guelph. So welcome.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Why did you want to put this book together?
We needed something to do during the pandemic. You know what? Ayelet tells this story so much better. Like, I tend to leave out details and get things wrong. So, do you mind telling it, Ayelet?
Oh, sure. It's really interesting how it came to each of us in a sort of a different way. I used to have this fantasy about having a collection of writers who write in their second language or something like that. And Leonarda wanted to do something about grammar and about grammar shaming. And I don't remember what Euphemia's thought was, but we all had an idea about language and an anthology and collecting, stories by writers who write about language. And then one day I remember suddenly it occurred to me that it's one book. And I called you first, and I was like, hey, don't you think that's actually just one anthology? And you're like, that's totally one anthology. And then I called Leonarda next. So, I mean, we all had such preoccupation with language in our lives as, immigrants, as women who spoke, more than one language, who were born into one language and then ended up speaking another, in various levels of, for you, it became kind of a native tongue early on. For Leonarda, a little bit later. I'm still, English is still my second language. But yeah, so we all we couldn't not be interested in it. It's our lives, it's the way we communicate with our families. It's the way people communicate with us in the world or how they perceive us. It's in our accents and it's in everything. And as writers, it seemed to make sense that this would be how we explore it. writers who write in English. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think at some point early on in our friendships, we had shared some kind of story of language discrimination or language shaming. So it was like that was an element that we all were interested in, and we would send each other. I think it was like early on, Ayelet sent me Leonardo's essay that was the inspiration.
Right.
The title.
Right. We forgot that part.
Yeah, and I was like, these are the stories I want to hear. These are the stories I think about. These are the stories I want to write. Instead of like, early on in my writing life, I was always trying to write towards capital L literature, which meant I never engaged with characters who looked like me, sounded like me, looked like my parents, because they had never been represented on the page in a way that I like in my entire education. And I had wonderful like English teachers who were really like, they were passionate. There were all these things, but I was reading things that were outside of my scope of reference. And I could not, relate to Hagar Shipley and the world that Margaret Lawrence was creating. And it was like, this isn't really, and you still see it, when you see it, it's like kids are still being taught Lord of the
Flies.
Some lord somewhere lording, right?
Written by a guy.
And it's like this, and it's like there were so many incredible books that have been written in the last 5 years, in the last year, in the last decade, that these young adults would really like, they would actually appreciate, and they would delve into, and they would actually not have the hangups about reading and literature. So it was really just like, because I'm so stubborn, that I kept at it. And then finally, thank goodness, people like Leonardo, suddenly those stories were being published in literary magazines like Room, and I could find them, or Ayelet would send them to me, and I'd be like, this is the world I want to live in. The world where we write these stories and talk about these experiences that are not one homogenous blanket culture.
In your intro, you talk a little bit about, this is a multilingual group of people who've written all these essays, and yet they're all written in English. So can you speak a little bit about why you made that decision?
In one way, it was a really simple decision to make, because we are only capable of editing in English. Whether we had some facility with our other languages, we just were like, this isn't going to fly. Like I couldn't edit in Italian, and I think we wanted to keep it as, we wanted to acknowledge it and also keep it as straightforward as possible. This was going to be for a specifically like an audience that could read in English. And we felt like, we just barely scratched the tip of the iceberg with the pieces that we had. There are so many. We would love to see this continue. I would love to see a version of this just for Indigenous languages. Like there's just so many. And what happens, if you become the only person that's speaking for that one voice, it's so much pressure. And we knew that we only had so much room and so many people that we could ask, because our list of people that we wanted to invite was quite long, and we had to keep paring it down. And then for us to be able to edit the work with any kind of confidence and not drag the project on to a 3-year pandemic instead of a 2-year pandemic, sorry. We just knew we had to work with the one, and we knew that was where our strength was as a trio of editors and as a group of people that we were just wanting to see this book out there. We wanted that book to exist. And we knew that like we just didn't have the resources to do other languages in that book.
But I think what's cool is that other languages do make appearances in the pages, and that's the other thing. When you were talking about how you didn't see yourselves in the literature you were assigned in school. It's also like you've never seen your language anywhere, and if you did see it, it was italicized, and you were told that it's foreign. You were told that it's different, which is not what you want. It's not different for you, and it's not foreign for you. Yeah. So that was one little way that we could include, the other languages. Of course, it was, it depended on the writer. Not everyone chose to do that, but yeah, it's a little nod to all these other tongues.
You spoke earlier about experiencing language shame or linguistic discrimination. Does that happen in English as well as the language that you grew up in?
I think we both experienced it in both languages. For me personally, obviously, I came to Canada, my English was okay. I spoke English, I knew English, but it was conversational. It was mediocre. It was definitely not a language I could write in. And yes, I made a lot of mistakes, and yes, there was a lot of vocabulary gaps. And because I have a good ear, the accent didn't always, like sometimes people didn't assume that I knew as little as I did. And then when I made this glaring error, they felt okay making fun of me, or, like, you don't know that word? And I'm like, no, I've been to Canada for 2 years. I'm an immigrant, but so I've had a lot of these experiences. But I think one of the worst, and I don't think I ever told anyone that. So here, this is something new. I think I must have told you, Euphemia. But when I came into my immigration the citizenship ceremony, I came to sign my signature, and my signature remains in Hebrew. So it's in a different alphabet. And the Immigration Canada person who was standing next to me looked at me and said very didactically, "This is Canada here.
Oh my God.
We have to sign in English."
Oh my God.
And this is the only document I have that I have my signature written in English. Like, I'm an author now. I sign my books in Hebrew, because this is my signature. The only document that exists in the world where I was forced to write my name, to fake sign my name in English, was not even my signature, so that was, I don't think I've ever actually, because I felt a little bit ashamed for not putting my foot down afterwards. Yeah. I was like, I should have said something. I should have said like, no, but I was like, the magnitude of the event and whatever, and I just didn't. But then what happened to me, it's interesting how even for someone who moved, late in life, I was 25 when I moved to Canada, my mother tongue suffered, because I was not using it as much. Back when I moved to Canada, there was no social media, there was no direct connection, phone calls were expensive, and there were very few Israelis living in Vancouver at the time, like 5. This is not the case now. So I never heard it spoken in the street, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I started to completely, it's so interesting, like from living in one language to, living entirely in another language and having no opportunity to practice my mother tongue. So yeah, it atrophied. And then whenever I came back to Israel, suddenly, we have that, Hebrew is a gendered language. So numbers are gendered even, right? So if you use the wrong gender for an object, that's really frowned upon. That immediately marks you as someone who is not as intelligent. And suddenly I go around, saying the wrong numbers and. And I remember I have an uncle who's a PhD, and he said, like, I don't care about this. And it was so refreshing to me to hear him say that. It's like, I don't care. Like, I understand what they mean. If it's Stein or Schneim, who cares, And I was like, yes, so that really, it made me humble, because I think I used to be that person. I used to think, that you're more intelligent if you know which number to use. I don't know even the terms for it because they don't exist in English. So I know you do, but I have no idea. But like, I suddenly changed my mind and started to reconsider what's important.
I think anytime someone starts a sentence with "This is Canada," everything's going to go downhill from there. All the points that you're making are also like one of the reasons that we were so inspired for this book was because I grew up in an environment where I saw people treated as less intelligent simply because they had incredibly thick accents. So I was always fascinated with pronunciation. And then I went to become an ESL teacher. And the first month we watched a video. It was from the 80s, so it was quite dated. But we watched a video where an instructor spent, I swear, like 7 minutes trying to teach people who could not make the TH sound.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was furious at the end of it. I was like, this is a waste of time. This is going to give somebody a complex about learning languages. And really, like, the pronunciation fascists have to calm down, right? Like, they really
Yeah.
have to calm down. Like, they know, like, I've watched people treat my parents like, just because they say Thursday instead of Thursday, they're like acting like, oh my God, well, I can't understand the thing this person's saying. There's no other day of the week that sounds like that. You know, and you really are like a jerk for singling out the fact that because their tongue goes to a different place in their palate in their mouth to make
It's hard. The TH is hard. I struggled.
but some people are not going to get there. You know,
Yeah.
but I still know what they're saying. So I know, even as an instructor, I've had students who've become incredibly frustrated if I don't understand something. And I'm always sort of saying, you know, it's not your pronunciation. It's my listening skills that haven't developed with this accent. I will get there. And I'm sorry that it's frustrating, but we'll get there together. Like, it's absolutely appalling to me that anybody would like just correct somebody's pronunciation. And I'm not talking about like, who cares if you say chamomile or chamomile? I couldn't care less. But if someone's saying like Thursday and you don't understand and you're like, oh, you mean Thursday? What is this? What is the point of a moment like that? To just shame someone because they can't make that sound. And if they can't, you still understand what they're saying and you continue the conversation. You know, like, it's like people just do a full stop and they're like, hold the phone. I can't understand. This is so, you know, and it's like, it's absurd. It's absurd in those situations. Like, you really need to be able to like say, I get what this person is saying. And I've had times in my life where, because I was raised by parents who spoke one language and I read in a different language, my reading comprehension was way ahead of my speaking comprehension. So then I walk into a room and I say something and this is when everybody takes the opportunity to mock me. And I think, still, what I'm doing here is displaying like a tendency to want to have a large vocabulary. What's to mock in this? Whether I pronounce it this way or that way, which is why even in my essay when I'm talking about my name, I'm like, it's just that it's got these pronunciations that are a mishmash of like English plus Italian plus other things. And English is like the language that has stolen from every other language. So it's got like it's so hard to learn because people are like, is this a Latin word? Is this a Germanic? Where does this word come from? And it's like, well, we just took from everywhere because that's what a colonizing language does. It just goes in, it takes whatever it wants and says, this is mine, you know? And then it's like, you know, the king of the hill language is like, it's just like there's moments when you even hear in popular culture. And when I heard the story of Sean Bean, when he was asked if he could do the RP, the received pronunciation of English for Game of Thrones, he was like, no, can't do it. So everybody had to learn to do a northern accent in that Stark family. And I was like, fantastic. I love this because we want linguistic diversity. We don't want everybody to sound the same. It's so annoying. It would be so boring if we lived in a world where everybody, it would be dystopian, actually. Like, it would be like, everybody sounds the same. I feel like I'm surrounded by robots. There's no musicality of accents. It would be horrific.
That would suck.
It really would.
What do these essays tell us about our relationship to language and languages?
That's such a great question. I mean, it tells us, I think all of them tell us how intimate the relationship to language and identity is. Like, it's so tied, like, you just can't separate them. So the language that you think in, dream in, love in, all those things are so connected to your identity and your idea of self. So what happens then, like in some of the essays that we have, like what happens if your language has violently been taken away from you, like in Indigenous nations where they weren't allowed to speak, that they were taken away from that language as children, and then the systematic destruction of that and the cultural connection to the language. Like, the language represents more than just the personal identity, but it's connected to the world around them and how they reflect and connect to the world around them. So I think I'm not saying this just as a co-editor for the anthology, but I find them all incredibly moving essays. And I know when we did the launch, Ayelet was saying something similar about like when we had the writers reading excerpts from their essays, they were all so powerful. They were all so incredibly compelling in that kind of way where you're like, yeah, I feel this tug on my heart. Like this is definitely something that matters to me and other people, like language and the lost language of their ancestors or things like that. Yeah. Which is why the ethos of this like podcast that you're doing. And I was talking to Carrie before about the TED Talk that she did, like language discrimination. Like it really does. I'm constantly dealing with students at the college that may have real hangups about writing when they come to the composition class because they've been treated their whole lives as if they can't communicate because they speak with an accent. They've picked up their parents' inflections, or they've come from someplace else, and so they speak a different version of English. And they're being told, like, you don't say ax, you say ask. And it's like, no, you can actually, like, I can figure it out. So can everybody else in this room that's speaking English. Let's keep with the like multi versions of English. And then let's try to like stop languages from going extinct as well. You know, like that's what we want. We want a world where like we stop doing that, shaming people, because it is exactly, you think you're shaming them about their language, but you're really shaming them about their class, their ethnic background, their gender, their culture. Yeah.
I think that people that speak or sign the standardized way perhaps don't mean to be assholes, like we say on the show or why we have the podcast, but haven't had to think about what it's like for someone to say, you don't say ax, you say ask, and how that feels. It doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And I think, but the thing is, if you haven't had to think about like it because you haven't been in an environment where people speak like English with an accent, it should still it's still in the last so many, like, let's say the last 5 years, but I'm hoping longer, further back, it should be obvious that you're not, like, nobody's got time to relearn the English language that they learned growing up. Like, look, it's not necessary. Like, so it shouldn't, the idea of correcting people, I'm very aware, like, if it's a correction because I think it'll stand out and have someone be judged, I might mention it to them, but I'm not correcting them because I think there's only one way to say something,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it is a tricky line, right? Because it's, will this help you get those job offers?
Yes, because they do it all by voice and how you speak over the phone, right? If they're like, they don't even see you, so they're still judging from the way you sound or the vocabulary.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to give you a compliment first, before we go back on, that when we got the PDF of your anthology, I was just like, damn it, because I knew I was going to be emotional. and I think that's a compliment. I think that it's I read to feel.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I always say that. This is the same. I read to feel deeply. Like, absolutely. Thank you.
So, yeah, I guess speaking about the emotions and feelings, Euphemia, what is your essay, 5 Stages of Language Loss, about?
So it's really about the fact that, I've been dealing with grief my whole life. Before I knew that it was grief, I thought it was depression. We thought it was anxiety. We thought it was a whole bunch of things. But it's really knowing that at some point I won't be able to speak the dialect of Italian that I speak with my father and my aunts anymore because they'll be gone. And they've been getting older and ill. And there's all kinds of issues with communicating because even communicating with them, there's still problems. Like my aunt was telling me about a certain kind of juice today, and I was like, we were trying every combination, and she could not give me the word that I could translate into Italian. I was like, can we spell it? And I was like, I'm just frustrating this poor 85-year-old woman. But I was like, I don't know what juice we're talking about. She's like, you know what? I'm going to hang on to the bottle, and then I'll either get your cousin to take a picture of it and text it to you, or you can come see it. And I was like, okay, great. But so the essay is really about the fact that I've tried to learn Italian and then let that go because the dialect is my language. it's its own language, you know, and then there's a whole thing about whether I call it a dialect or language, because it is a language. So I've tried to learn standard Italian and just all that language represents, because it's a tricky relationship. My parents had an arranged marriage, and my mother had a severe mental illness. And so there was a lot of violence in our home. So that language, as much as I love it and as much as I want to preserve it, is also connected to huge instances of violence, and there's a lot to grieve there. So recognizing that, you know, when I talk to myself, I usually talk to myself in that language. And then sometimes I'm aware that that's because that's the language of my inner critic. That's like, oh, nicely done there. You know, good work. Like in that essay, I'm trying to really think about that tightrope that I walk between these two cultures. And I'm so grateful to live in the land that I live in Canada, and have the opportunity to be here. And you know, I know there's problems in both, but I'm just like, I've been raised in a culture where people can be blunt and nasty and cruel, you know, and they do it out of love, which is really hard. Right. You know, it's really hard to navigate that when somebody's like, you know, there was an expression that we used in the family that my aunt would tell me in the village was, you know, I saw your name in the book of idiots. And it was like saying to someone, and I was just like, look, this is how you tell someone, right?
It's hilarious.
Yeah. And, so, but they're telling you things, you know, they're constantly judging you. You going out dressed like that? Why have you got a haircut? Like, what's going on with your hair these days? And they're really coming from a place of love, which is really hard to take in. But it's, you know, it's within the language. There's like a lot of this negative bias too. And then I'm like, you know, there's a part of me I love the opportunity I've had to live in a culture where people are a little more nuanced, or a little more polite and less blunt and in your face. But I recognize that those two things can be like one side sees the other as deceitful, and the other side sees the other one as rude, when it's like, so, you know, I think I'm grieving what's going to be gone when I'm not able to have that conversation in that language every day.
Can I ask, is this like a geographical, like based language, like in part of Italy?
It's it's really similar to Neapolitan, but if I called it Neapolitan, they would get upset. So it's within the Neapolitan language, and it's one of the subsections of that. So it's definitely in the middle part of Italy, the Mezzogiorno. Yeah, they're really, you know, it's amazing. My father went to school with someone who was who went on to get their PhD, which was kind of amazing for that time and place in Italy. And they wrote a book about the dialect, the Molisano dialect, and I could read it. It's the first time I've ever opened a book and been like, oh my God, this is written exactly how I would expect the pronunciation to be. And I could make out all the words. And I was like, because they're exactly the words that are in my head from that language. So
there are not very many literary materials.
Yeah, exactly.
I liked this quote from your essay. I speak what's proper for me and my family. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I remember every time I get asked about whether I speak Italian, I always come back ashamed and embarrassed, and I say, no, I speak a dialect, as if I'm like lesser than the people who speak standard Italian. And that was a specific instance with, you know, a customer that I had when I worked at Chapters in Metrotown out in Burnaby, and they were, you know, they saw my name tag and they knew how to pronounce my name, and they were like, this person's got, you know, they saw my name tag, took a look at my nose profile, and they were like, this person's clearly Italian. So they started asking me questions about whether I could speak Italian. And I thought, you know, it's so fascinating, because she can appreciate and enjoy that language and the country without, you know, experiencing any of that shadow stuff that I have had to deal with, the misogyny, the this, the that. You can just be like, oh, everything's so beautiful. And it's like, really? Because the expectations on women are out of this world. And it is ground zero for like the misogyny, as far as I'm concerned, of the Catholic Church and the Roman Empire. So it was in that moment that I was like, I can't believe this person is judging me because I don't speak standard Italian. Like, we're all sitting around in my like Italian immigrant home, drinking espresso, talking about marble and books and opera. No, everybody's exhausted. They want to watch like some kind of entertainment that's going to appeal to them. And then they're just like, that's it. Good night. I'm out, you know, and I don't, no one else in my family is really keen on books. My dad has a few, but he's just like, you know, no, I watched the movie. Like, they're not into it. So I'm always the one that's a little bit unusual. But thankfully, my dad wasn't the kind of person who was like, oh, you're wasting money on books. There's the library. He was always indulging that passion. So I think I had my moment of just being kind of like, this person has a specific idea of what is proper when they're speaking Italian. And I was like, I felt exactly like what sort of your TED Talk covers, Carrie, where I felt like they're judging my Italian. They're judging where my family comes from. They're judging, they can tell by my accent that I'm a peasant. And I'm like, and what's wrong with that? We're the ones that we're the ones that made sure the fields were hoed and that the wheat was brought to harvest. And we're also the ones that usually ended up like staffing the military when you always went to war, right? Like you took from the South where there was a population explosion. Or you were like, oh, a family of 10, we'll send like 9 of them to war. So I just felt like, no, I can't handle somebody judging me for my not speaking proper standard Italian with my family, because it does feel like an economic judgment. Like you should be more posh. Like, why aren't you speaking proper Italian? It's so beautiful. And it was like, I speak what's right. Like we understand each other. This is the point of language.
So as proper Italian, you gotta talk about marble.
People are like, oh, you're Italian. And I'm like, yes. And my favorite opera is like, it doesn't happen that way. Or like they'll assume certain things, and I'll be like, my favorite food is spaghetti and meatballs, and that's a really Italian American version of food. You tell that to Italians, and they're just like, you're destroying everything.
Yeah. So, what does Maulisan mean to you?
Maulisan means people that have endured, people that are tough, people that are just like. Maybe, I should forgive that negative bias a little bit, because they have been oppressed. They've had everything taken away from them. They lived under a feudal system for so long, but they are they're a little bit anarchist, I think. And they're a little bit, so it's all the things that I'm like, yes, like I'm proud of like these ancestors that were socialist, or they were just like, on my father's side, they were actually bandits. They were just like, seriously, you're going to tax us? Well, we're going to actually fight back by living in caves. And every so often, we're just going to come down from the caves and kill people. So
it's like Robin Hood.
Yeah, totally. Right. I was like, was there anybody who stole from the rich to give to the poor? And my dad was like, to give to, they were poor. Who are they giving to? They're just trying to survive,
Yeah.
So yeah, being Maulisan just means like, because it is one of the regions in Italy that it is the one that gets made fun of, I guess. Like in Canada, when I was growing up, people made fun of Newfoundland and the Newfoundland accent. And I don't know why. Like lovely people, generous people, wonderful people. So the same, I think about Maulisan. I think like, you don't get to make fun of us and in your face. Like, and actually years ago, someone said to me when I joined the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, they were like, so what part of Italy is your family from? And I was like, Molise. And they were like, no kidding. Like Nino Ricci. And they were like, do you know how many people are in our association from Molise? Is there something in the water? And I was like, yeah, anarchy. Right? So
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So it's nice to know that people who were for generations denied an education or opportunity, that their descendants are being born as storytellers and coming forward and telling tales.
So before we move on from you, how do you pronounce your name?
I introduce myself as Euphemia because it's easier for people that speak English, and I don't want them to get tongue-tied over that difficulty. And it's because that was the name I was called for 20 years. It wasn't until I was in first year university in an Italian class that the instructor said it's supposed to be, well, in Italian, they would say Eufemia. And then I was in a Latin class at the same time, and they were like, it's Euphemia. And I was like, it's what? So it was too much. Like my brain was like, doesn't that sound a little bit like putting on airs? Like it's Euphemia. Like, but I go by both. And I never correct people either way. I just tell them if they're not sure. It rhymes with Bohemian.
What does your father call you?
Eufemia.
But both of those feel okay to you, or all three?
All of them do, but Eufemia is a sound that can't really be made by people who don't speak Italian, Spanish, or even Portuguese. Like the French struggle with it too. So it's a vowel combination that's really only used by Italian, Spanish, Latin.
What is it? Ale?
Ale.
Ale.
Yeah, but it's like, so I usually go with Euphemia because it's just easier. When I live in English, that's the one.
Ayelet, what is your essay Disappearance/Muteness about? And why did you call your essay that?
I've written a lot about writing in a second language. I talk a lot about writing in a second language, about my relationship with English and my relationship with Hebrew. But I always knew that there was another language, inside that I don't speak, but I know a little bit of. It always felt like a really big part of me that was not out in the open because, as we said, it's so entwined with our identity and with our sense of selves. I think the more that I started to accept my Yemeniness and my Arabness and that part of my identity, I also started to long for the language more. And that is something that happened to me actually in Canada. A lot of what you're saying, Euphemia, I find so many, obviously, that, but there's so many resonance. It wasn't encouraged growing up in Israel to embrace that part of your identity. And it wasn't encouraged to embrace that accent, which means you pronounce your het and your ein, those guttural or the glottal, I think it's called, consonants. So I've pushed all of that away. And, I pushed that identity and I pushed that accent and I pushed that language away. And only, as I said, as an adult, like when I was like in my late 20s, I started to want to reclaim it. But of course, by then, I wouldn't say it's too late because it's never too late, but it's very hard to learn a language that late in life. And it feels like a constant ache not being able to speak it, even without the political added, sorrow of it, not being able to speak with my neighbors, with the people who share this land with. Where I live now, I do live in Israel now.
Do you feel like it was forced on you? Was this internal or external or both happening?
I would say it's both. We do so the Arabic, similarly like to Italian, probably more so. There's so many dialects and there's so many, regions and countries. So the Palestinian or the regional area, the regional language that is spoken in this area in the Middle East, not even in the Middle East, and I would say Palestine, Lebanon, and so on. That was a tongue that we were kind of being taught, but not really, because we were taught the written version of it, which is useless, because nobody speaks it except for like some radio, anchors and things like that. It would not help me communicate with my neighbors, and surely I lost, interest in it because it wasn't a live and dynamic language that I could use. As far as the ancestral tongue, it's a few things. A part of it was, denying that part of the identity. A part of it was that there wasn't a lot of people to talk to. There was my grandmother, but in a sense, and it's sad to say that, but I feel like I pushed her away a little bit, because she represented something diasporic and foreign, and also, if to be completely frank, primitive, a little backwards in what, the fact that she didn't know how to read and write and she spoke funny and she looked different and so on. So yes, a lot of it was internal, but also brought on by the spirit of what was, what we were. I was a victim of society, as we all are. So yeah, I guess the essay it's a lot. I was trying to do a lot in that essay. And the disappearance is, first of all, because this language, the specific tongue, the specific dialect that my grandparents spoke and my mom still knows is dying, is disappearing, right? Because there are no more Jews living in Yemen. There were very few left. and they're gone. They were just they were just expelled. That just happened in 2021, due to the horrific war that is taking place there. They were just expelled. It's the end of an era. There's no more Jews left in Yemen. From what I know, they have been expelled to Saudi Arabia. So there's that. But there's also that muteness, because and in Hebrew, right? Those letters, the sound, they sound the same. He'almut, he'almut. If you don't pronounce the guttural ayn, they sound exactly the same. If you do, then you have he'almut and you have he'almut, and that is different, right?
Those different words.
Completely different words. They're completely different words, but they sound the same because we have flattened it, right? The Hebrew language as is spoken today flattened it into one sound. Both of those things happening. There's the disappearance of the language. There's the muteness that was forced, that was internal. So that was kind of me trying to grasp all of that, and how complicated that language, that relationship I have with the Arabic language, with my ancestral language, and my longings for it. Yeah, it's so much. It feels like an entire book could have been written about that.
Yeah, I just loved that those that pair of words, and the ein and the glottal stop. I think it was really like just this really beautiful encapsulation of what you were trying to do. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
Can you just talk a little bit about how Arabic is viewed in Israel and in Canada?
So the interesting thing about Arabic, like I really related to what you said, Euphemia, about, you have these ancestors, and then you have the children and the grandchildren of these, bandits now becoming storytellers. And in Israel, we have this resurgence of all of those mother tongues, or the ancestral tongues, I should say, that have been quieted. And a lot of younger people nowadays want to reclaim them. So there are a lot of, Arabic lessons and Arabic schools opening up suddenly, where younger people are saying, wait a second, this was taken away from us. We weren't able to communicate with our grandparents because we were ashamed. And now we want to take it back into our hands. And I think that's amazing. And that gives me hope. And also, of course, there's, it allows for more communication with Palestinians, with our neighbors. It was interesting for me moving to Canada, because the first time that I heard Arabic in Canada, I tensed up, and and it was very interesting. I was like, oh wow, what an interesting reaction, and it made me see how fear was instilled in me, how I grew to fear that language. And because I grew to fear that language, of course, I wouldn't want to, speak to my grandmother. And that made me so sad to understand, like again, how politicized it became, and it damaged my relationship with my grandmother because of that. And then from there, it took me to a place where I wanted, to learn it, and I started taking lessons, and it's all in the essay. I worked at a Lebanese restaurant, and my Arabic improved. That said, while I was living in Canada, September 11 happened, and suddenly Arabic started to become a feared language in Canada as well. And that was really an interesting development to be watching. And as someone who's always been confused for an Arab, which makes sense since I am Yemeni and I am, an Arab and an Arab Jew. It was something that I saw very closely. I felt it, even the way people viewed people who looked like me. So I experienced that change in Canada as well. I feel like it's better now. I hope so. But in Israel, definitely a lot of people sing in Arabic now. There's more of there's an appreciation for it, and a reclaiming of it as not just the language of the enemy, but also a language that was used by Jewish people for generations. not necessarily associating it, like learning to see it in a positive way and in a way that to reclaim it, as something from our history.
So is that what you're doing? Is that how you feel about it at this point in your life?
I absolutely, yeah. Like I've been feeling that for a long time now. And like I said, it happened in Canada, of all places, that I suddenly, I think it was missing home, and it was missing my grandmother. It was missing my family, and realizing that going to the Jewish Community Center was not answering that need, where people were mostly white, where people were mostly Canadian, where their culture was nothing like mine, even though we share Judaism, what they ate and what their grandparents spoke and how they looked like was not the same thing. And that drew me to find the Arabic culture in Vancouver and see that I relate there. And that's where you met me, Carrie, at the community center, belly dancing. I'm going to expose you here.
That's correct.
So yeah, I now feel a very strong connection to it. I love the language. I love how it sounds. I have this visceral reaction to it, like from someone who feared it, tensed up when she first heard it. Now when I hear it, I have a very warm sensation. It's a very positive reaction. I think it's such a beautiful language. And I sing it, like I say in the essay. I now sing it. I don't speak it, but I sing it.
It's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually took a couple of years of Arabic in university, so.
Did you?
Yeah, don't ask me to say anything. But yeah, I really loved it. I thought it was really beautiful. And this was pre 9/11, so yeah, like I still would have done it, but but it did have a different valence for sure pre 9/11.
Yeah.
Before we go, is there any last words you'd like to leave with our listeners? Either of you?
Well, I know we are really grateful that you had us on your fabulous podcast. I almost said podcast. And that's how I want to say it. That's just
we understood.
Yeah,
totally.
Thank you. But yeah, I guess I wanted to just one last thing about something Ayelet said was this is something I came to as an adult. When I was a kid, I wanted to distance myself from that Molizan accent. I wished I spoke standard Italian. I wanted to be as far away from the people that represented poverty and hardship as possible. I wanted to masquerade as someone else. And it's only been, so hopefully in saying this, I guess what I would want your listeners to think about is what language is in their DNA and what language are they disconnected from. About 4 years ago, Lee Maracle, it's hard to think of her and still think that, she's gone. It's just horrific, but it's so upsetting. She was at the Creative Nonfiction Collectives conference and she asked the audience, who here actually writes in English but has ancestors that speak another language. And she then made the point, you're disconnected from your body. It's like your mind is saying this and your body is saying this, and the language that inhabits your body is the one that you're disconnected from because you're communicating in English. So, I mean, we need a global language so that we can have global peace, but we need to also remember that when we lose a language or when we ask people to speak English the same way, we are committing an act of violence. We're going to lose so much if we don't protect those languages and start feeling, when you hear another language, just engaging with it or just trying not to tense up, I guess, about certain things about language, because we've all had that experience.
Anything else?
Read the book.
Yes.
Okay, yes, definitely read the book. I really appreciate the cover, the quotation bubble. It's really cool. Yeah. So thanks both of you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
And we always leave our listeners with one final message: don't be an asshole.
What a great final message. I'm going to hold that one in my heart for the coming months at the final stages of this pandemic.
Yes, please.
Exactly.
Yes.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.